In 1900, the British Empire controlled territories across the entire world. Its armies had conquered kingdoms. Its navy ruled the seas. Its flag flew across continents. Then in West Africa, something happened that the British did not expect. A room filled with Ashanti chiefs fell completely silent. The British had demanded the most sacred object of the Ashanti people. The male chiefs hesitated. They were afraid. Then a woman stood up. She was around 60 years old. A queen mother. A farmer. A political leader. Her name was Yaa Asantewaa. And she asked a question that would ignite a war. Where were the men? If the men would not fight, then she would. The British Empire had faced armies before. But this time its enemy was a grandmother who refused to surrender her people's soul. Yaa Asantewaa was born in the Ashanti region of West Africa. She became the Queen Mother of Ejisu. But this was not merely a ceremonial title. In Ashanti society, Queen Mothers held serious political authority. They advised rulers. They represented communities. They could influence succession. They could mobilize people. Yaa Asantewaa understood power. She understood tradition. And she understood something else. The British were not simply trying to control land. They were trying to control the people who lived on it. And she would not accept that. To understand Yaa Asantewaa, you have to understand the kingdom she defended. The Ashanti Kingdom was one of the most powerful states in West Africa. It had armies, government institutions, trade networks, skilled craftsmen, gold, and a sophisticated political system centered around Kumasi. The Ashanti were not an isolated people waiting for Europe to discover them. They had their own civilization, their own military, their own economy, their own understanding of sovereignty. Then the British came. And they wanted control. British expansion in West Africa had been growing for decades. Trade came first. Then treaties. Then military intervention. Then colonial administration. The Ashanti resisted. There were wars. Treaties were broken. Power shifted. The British eventually captured Kumasi. But capturing a capital did not mean destroying a people's identity. The Ashanti still remembered their kingdom. They still remembered their king. And above all, they still remembered the Golden Stool. The Golden Stool. The Golden Stool was not simply a throne. It was the soul and unity of the Ashanti nation. It represented the authority and spiritual identity of an entire people. It was treated with enormous reverence. Then came the demand that transformed tension into outrage. British Governor Sir Frederick Hodgson demanded access to the Golden Stool. He wanted the most sacred symbol of Ashanti authority. To the British, it was a political object. To the Ashanti, it represented something far deeper. Their nation. Their ancestors. Their sovereignty. Their identity. The demand was not merely offensive. It was explosive. The king was already gone. The Ashanti King Prempeh had already been removed from power. Arrested. Exiled. Sent far from his homeland. The Ashanti had lost their king. Their political independence was under enormous pressure. And now the British wanted their most sacred symbol. This was no longer simply about government. This was about whether the Ashanti people would retain control over themselves. Then came the meeting. The chiefs gathered. The British had made their demand. The atmosphere was heavy with tension. But nobody wanted to make the first move. The chiefs understood what war against Britain could mean. British weapons were powerful. The consequences could be devastating. So they hesitated. They discussed. They remained silent. And Yaa Asantewaa watched. Then she rose. The woman who had spent decades living within Ashanti society now became the most important voice in its resistance. Her message was devastating. If the men would not defend their nation, the women would. The exact wording of Yaa Asantewa's famous speech has been preserved through oral and written traditions, and historians caution against treating every modern version as a verbatim transcript. But the spirit of the speech is unmistakable. She challenged the chiefs. She reminded them of their ancestors. She reminded them of their dignity. And she confronted their fear directly. A commonly cited version has her declaring, "Now I see that some of you are afraid to go forward and fight for our king." Then came the line that became legendary. She declared that if the men would not fight, the women would. She invoked Ashanti traditions. She invoked the strength of their ancestors. And she made a choice brutally simple: submit or resist. The room had changed. Fear had become anger. Anger had become determination. And Yaa Asantewaa had become the symbol of resistance. This is where the story becomes even more extraordinary. Yaa Asantewaa did not simply inspire people. She helped organize the resistance. The conflict became known as the War of the Golden Stool. Warriors mobilized. Supplies were organized. Defensive positions were established. Messages moved between communities. And the resistance gathered around a simple objective: protect the Golden Stool. Protect Ashanti sovereignty. The British expected submission. Instead, they got war. In 1900, Ashanti resistance fighters attacked British positions. The conflict became intense. British forces in Kumasi faced fierce resistance and found themselves besieged. For weeks the pressure continued. The Ashanti knew the terrain. They understood local conditions. They used forests and roads to their advantage. And Yaa Asantewa's forces refused to simply disappear. The British were fighting an enemy who understood that surrender meant the destruction of everything they were. Smoke in the distance. Gunfire cutting through the forest. Warriors moving through difficult terrain. British soldiers trapped inside defensive positions. The entire conflict had become a struggle of endurance. The British had superior military technology. But technology did not make the Ashanti resistance disappear. The resistance held. And for a time the British were under enormous pressure. The siege of Kumasi demonstrated something the British Empire had repeatedly learned across Africa. Conquest was easier on a map than it was on the ground. Yaa Asantewaa became the face of the resistance. But this was not a fairy tale. The British had enormous resources. They could bring reinforcements. They could bring more weapons. The Ashanti resistance faced shortages, casualties, overwhelming imperial pressure. Still they fought. For months. The resistance forced Britain to spend lives, resources and military effort suppressing a kingdom that had already been declared under British control. That alone was significant. The Ashanti had refused to accept the end of their sovereignty quietly. Eventually British reinforcements arrived. The balance shifted. British forces pushed deeper into Ashanti territory. The resistance weakened. Leaders were hunted. Communities suffered. And the war that Yaa Asantewaa had helped ignite was slowly crushed by a vastly larger imperial machine. Then came the moment nobody wanted. Yaa Asantewaa was captured. The woman who had stood against the British Empire was now their prisoner. Yaa Asantewaa was exiled to the Seychelles. Thousands of miles from the land she had defended. Away from Ejisu. Away from Kumasi. Away from the people who had followed her. She would never return to her homeland. She died in exile in 1921. Think about that. The woman who had stood at the center of one of the most important anti-colonial wars in West African history died far from home. But the British could exile her body. They could not exile the memory. The British won the war. But victory did not erase Yaa Asantewaa. It did not erase the Golden Stool. It did not erase Ashanti identity. And it did not erase the memory of resistance. Years passed. The colonial system remained. But so did the story. Parents told children. Communities remembered. Historians documented. And eventually Yaa Asantewaa became something bigger than the woman who fought one war. She became a symbol. Today Yaa Asantewaa is remembered as one of the most important figures in Ghanaian history. Her name is attached to schools, institutions, cultural commemorations, and monuments. Prempeh returned to the Gold Coast in 1924, and Ghana eventually became independent in 1957. Yaa Asantewaa did not live to see that independence. She did not see the British flag replaced by gunners. But the spirit of resistance she represented became part of the larger story of African liberation. For African women, her story carries a powerful message. Leadership does not require permission. Courage does not belong to one gender. And age does not determine whether your voice matters. Yaa Asantewaa was around 60 when she stood against an empire. She did not command the largest army. She did not possess the most advanced weapons. But she possessed something the British could never manufacture: conviction. She believed her people were worth defending. And that belief turned one woman into a legend. The British Empire once seemed almost unstoppable. It had armies, ships, weapons, money, power. But in a meeting room in West Africa, one woman stood. She looked at men who were afraid, and she reminded them who they were. Her name was Yaa Asantewaa. She lost the war. But history did not defeat her. Because sometimes victory is not measured by who wins the battle. Sometimes victory is refusing to kneel. Yaa Asantewaa died far from home. But her voice came home. Her story came home. And her courage still echoes. If you had been standing in that room in 1900 knowing the British Empire could destroy everything you had, would you have fought anyway? Drop your answer in the comments below. And subscribe to Unveiled History, because the truth is always more powerful than the myth.